Oh, that was a bit loud. Volume down. Okay, everyone, thanks for joining us today. So hopefully you should see the screen with a QR code on it. Today we're going to be talking about building a CV. Now, this is really useful whatever stage you're at with building your CV. As part of job applications. So you might be a first year, you might be in your final year, you might be a master's student or other postgrad students. And whether you have a CV already or whether you want to improve on it, this will still be relevant for you. Okay, so some of the things we're going to look at today. Let me just check so I can move on my screen. So we're going to be looking at the purpose of a CV. So first of all, when I say CV, CV stands for curriculum vitae. It's actually originally Latin. We tend to say CV. You'll also know it as resume if you're more used to the American language for it. You'll tend to see it only written as CV. Rather than the full curriculum vitae. The Latin used to mean course of life, and it was the idea that you put all your things of your life down. You don't want to do exactly that nowadays, but we'll come to that in a moment. So we're going to try and understand the purpose of a CV. Seems very obvious. It's to get a job, but we'll talk about it a bit more than that. What are the key sections that you should be putting in your CV? The etiquette of what you should be putting. Looking around technology for CVs, that's both from your perspective, but also the recruiters use technology as well. And actually, what makes an effective CV? Because at the end of the day, if it's not effective, it won't get you very far. So let's move on. So here we have just lots of random pictures of different CVs of over the years, different things people have done. And I'd want to ask you before we start, although these all look very different, what are they all trying to achieve? What are they trying to do? So I would argue that they're all trying to sell. They're selling something, and the product that they're selling is yourself as the person. You're trying to make a pitch and stand out and say why you should pick me. Now, looking at these here, they all actually have the similar content in them. And so we're going to be going through those building blocks, but the format of how they're sharing it is quite different. Some of these are much more creative in the style of how they're showing um, sharing their achievements and things, and they'll have targeted specifically for the industry they're targeting. Um, what we're going to go through today is the key content. The format will come to a bit later because sometimes you want to be a bit careful on the format. So the aim of a CV is to get you essentially to the next stage in the recruitment process. That's because we think of a CV and we might think that, well, it's to get us the job, but the CV on its own won't be the only thing that gets you the job. So if you think of the recruitment process, if any of you have been to any of the other sessions, this is part of a block of sessions we're doing in careers here. So the recruitment process, you want to get to either interview or application center stage. That's because the big companies, they tend to have a whole application center. You might have done psychometric testing, other things. Your CV will help you get you there. So it's really that foot in the door to get someone to think, is this person worth me seeing them? Is it worth them going to the next stage in this recruitment process? So whenever you're thinking of your CV, I really want you to think about try and imagine yourself from the recruiter's point of view, what they're doing and they're thinking when they're looking at it. So to give you a bit of a reality check, um, the when a recruiter has lots and lots of CVs, they might have hundreds of CVs, they might not. They're however many CVs they have, they'll be putting them essentially, whether it's online or physically, into piles of yes, no, and maybe we want to look at them. So really, they're only spending a couple of minutes on every CV. Some even say if it's the very big, large corporations, they might say spend less time. And the large corporations a human being might not even see the CV. So we'll come to that bit in a second. And they will eventually see the CV, but the initial stage they might not. But your aim essentially is to get to the next stage. So you're trying to evidence to them why you're the person they should go for. And you're trying to do it in a very quick, simple, straightforward way. So it makes it easy for them to read. So they're not having to struggle being like, okay, where is the information I need? So you've really got to keep the person, the recruiter in mind when you're doing it. So imagine, the best way I find to imagine this is if you think when you're scrolling yourself online to buy something, and say you're buying a jacket, you're scrolling, you see lots of different jackets. You've gone on some website, whatever shopping thing you're on, and you're scrolling. There's hundreds of jackets, all different styles, all different shapes, all different, like, they're all being sold and pitched in a slightly different way to you. Now, you don't spend hours on each one really deciding until you've narrowed it down. Once you've narrowed it down, then you spend more time on it. So I want you to try and imagine your CV writing is like that from the recruiter's perspective. They're initially they just want to go, have you got this and this, and we'll talk about how you pick what you're going to put on it in a moment. And then as long as you tick certain boxes, then you'll get a bit further. And so then you'll be a smaller group of people with CVs, and then they might spend a bit more time looking at it. And you want to get in through that sales funnel. That's why I keep doing that, like a sales funnel. Okay. So you basic key sections of a CV. I would like to say if anyone is wanting to be an academic and a researcher, so if you're applying to do a PhD or you have a PhD and you're doing your CV for those purposes, it's quite a different style of CV. So this key sections here is correct for about 95% of jobs that you go for, but not if you're going for academic stuff. That's because they end up quite a lot longer and quite different. So do go and speak to a careers advisor in the management school if that's your situation. Similarly, there's one area of business which is high finance, like hedge funds. They do a slightly different version. So these are the key sections if you're in the UK or the US or this other English speaking countries. Okay. So at the top, you put your first name, your full name at the top. You don't need to title it CV or resume. You just put your full name. Sounds silly. People sometimes do wonderful CVs, forget to put their name at the top, and that will immediately disqualify you. I know it sounds strange, but it does happen. Afterwards, your contact details. So it says personal details here, but it's your contact details, email, mobile phone. A lot of people put LinkedIn now. LinkedIn is lovely to have. Only put it if you think your LinkedIn profile is good and it's going to sell you. Remember, all this is a pitch about yourself. Then the next element is your profile, key skills, key achievements. So this third bit here, that is very much almost optional. At the stage a lot of you will be at, I would suggest putting it, but it is optional. It's not always, people don't always put a profile. So, for example, a profile is saying about yourself. For example, I myself might be a higher educational professional who has 10 years experience in blah, blah, blah. And I'm interested in getting into whatever I'm interested in. So it's kind of, it's your little elevator pitch, just a few lines there, but you need to tailor it for the person and the role that you're doing. In fact, all these sections of the CV need to be tailored to match the job that you're applying for. So here we have also key skills and key achievements. So those skills, you're going to get them from the job description and the person spec. Okay. So each time when you're looking at this, you're going to have your job description, person spec next to you, and you're trying to make a match. Just like the people trying to sell you jackets, try and make sure that your needs match what they're selling you. It's the same sort of concept there. So then the next bit is you put all your work experience. Now, depending what stage you're at, how much work experience you have, you may have lots of experience, but you're more likely at this stage in your life not to have as much. You can put work experience and underneath put other experiences. So like voluntary work, other things. When you're putting work experience, you want to put it in what we call chronological order. So the most recent first and then go backwards. Okay, it's the most recent thing they want up at the top. And the style is, yes, your company that you worked for, the job title, dates. Sometimes myself and others will put the job title first if that looks better than the company name. Sometimes you put the company name first. So with all of this, there's a bit of judgment you need to do with it. Okay, responsibilities and achievements. So you don't want to just put everything your job entailed. You just want what are the key things you did that are relevant for this job that the recruiter is going to want to know. Okay, um, and if it's not as relevant, the job, you can condense it, put less, be more concise there. Um, so education, again, you put your most recent one first and then go backwards. So in the same way for that work experience. Um, Interests. Oh, another thing for education, you can at this stage when you're at university, you can also put the modules that were specifically of relevance to the job. Um, so you might have done a project, for example, as part of it. You could add that in under that bit there, or it depends what modules you have, but you can bullet point them. Um, Interest. Now, interests really act as a starting point. So if you get to interview, it gives something nice, relaxing to talk about to get the interview started. Okay. So it can also be really nice if it's got relevance. If it's got relevance for the job, it's brilliant. Put it in. And don't put a whole list of interests because that sometimes looks like you're more interested in your hobbies than the job. Okay. Um, but something that can start a conversation. So, for example, for myself, yes, I do my day job, but I also climb. I also speak French and do things around that, French language reading and things. So, you might put whatever your hobbies or your interests are. Do only put things that you're happy for them to then ask you about and talk about. Um, and then references. This again is optional, but it's nice if you already have references. So people who are willing to vouch for you. Remember your references, they need to be someone typically who line managed you or a tutor, someone who knew in those sorts of capacity. Um, you you for all jobs you'll have to provide references at some stage. You don't have to put them on at this stage, but it can be quite nice to. Um, so I put how long? How long does your CV need to be? Now, typically it's 1 to 2 pages. If you're in academia, as I mentioned at the start, and other things, it can go up to 4 pages. It can be quite long, but for this purpose, 1 to 2, no more than 2 pages long. So you're going to have to condense it. Okay. A CV. Do remember that a CV will be updated throughout your life. So you start off with your CV, you target it for specific jobs. You might have like a general CV and then tweak it for each job that you apply for. And then as the years progress, as you gain more experience, you build on it, you add to it. So it's kind of like a live document you keep up to date. And that's the best way to do it. If you're ever thinking of a career change, you also want to be starting to think, okay, what should I add in? And the reason I say it's a live document is it can be quite tricky to say, okay, my perfect job's come up. I need to do a CV from scratch now. You can do that. We've all done that, but it's harder. It's easier if you have time to build it. And that's partly because it links in with your whole career planning. And to get the right experience, you need to kind of be thinking, okay, what do I need? What am I missing on my CV? And trying to get those experiences that we'll come to in a moment. Now, here on the side, I've mentioned CV60 online CV checker. Now, that you will find online at the university careers website. I think it's on the next page. So it can help you. The CV builder above will help you build your CV. And you can also check your CV. So that's all the computer system helping you build it, helping you check it. It bases it on typical skills and keywords that are useful. I'll just, sorry, 1 second, to this bit. So because I'm talking about that, this is the technology side um, of doing your CV. So this is the careers portal. So if you go on to lancaster.ac.uk careers, go down to the careers portal, and then in there you'll see the page showing on the right here. It's on the right on my screen. I hope it's on the right on your screen. And those tools. So in that drop down, you can build your CV, and you can get your CV checked. Now, I really recommend doing that. That's really good. You can, of course, in this day and age, you can use ChatGPT, you can use lots of other things online. Now, there is something I personally would advise not to use things like ChatGPT. The reason being is the data you put into it, it's not like Google, it's very different to Google. Whatever data you put in, it's then owned and it stays there and it feeds the algorithm. So when you're talking about your personal life, personally, I would not want to be sharing that online, even though we do share a lot of things publicly. The difference with the ones by the universities, like this careers portal, is it's not then shared publicly. Like yes, you enter stuff, it stays on there, but it's never going to be Joe Blog. Somebody else can't just come and search for it. The reason I say that is in this day and age, with a lot of things being online, I think there's more risks around sharing your data. So you can do like all of us did, and we just wrote our CVs from scratch. But if you want to use technology, just be mindful of how you're using that technology. Okay. And technology, remember, the big employers, the very big corporates, the big companies, they will use technology, what we call ATS, applicant tracking systems, and they will use that to screen out the first load of CVs. So right at the start, when I showed you those pictures of lots of different CVs, some of them look very beautiful. And that's really nice. But if you know you're applying to a company that uses an applicant tracking system, then you don't want to be you want to make sure that the format you've made it in will still be readable by that system. Otherwise, you might make it beautiful. It might have brilliant content, but if the IT system can't read it, it will be knocked out and you won't get to the next stage. That's why we tend to advise people just to do a Word document and keep it simple. People over in doing very creative industries, they might be able to do those sorts of things, and the checkers might be okay on it. But our advice typically is just to do on a Word document. So that's a bit about your technology. Now, talking about your CV, there's two forms typically. There are other sorts, but the main ones are chronological, so date order, the most common thing first. So if you remember the previous slide to this, we talked about work experience and education qualifications, and I said you want the newest one date first and go back in date order. So that would be a chronological CV. Now, you could also choose to do a functional skills based CV. These tend to be a bit harder for recruiters to read, and you really want them to read things faster. But if you lack experience or you're changing careers, it can be helpful. If you have some brilliant, what we call transferable skills, so I don't know, communication, yes, it wasn't in a certain job, but it was in some other voluntary role or some other charity, something else you did, then that could be a skills thing and you want to put those skills down. And so communication would be example of a soft skill. When we talk about hard skills on here, we talk about more, like your IT programming languages, specific things you can do. Soft skills are more like communication, project management skills, teamwork, those sorts of things. Now, so your CV, with all of this, over the years, you see a lot of CVs where you can tell the person hasn't written it for a specific role. Um, I You can have a generic CV, especially if you're applying to similar roles all the time, but it's best to have your one you're typically using and then adapt it for each one. Um, it'll just increase your chances of it being effective, essentially, because you're giving the recruiter what they're looking for. And that's the aim of the game, really, when you're trying to sell yourself. So keep it easy to read, logical. So it shouldn't be all over the place. They shouldn't. One thing we often say is hold it at arm's length. And is that something you'd want to read? Because recruiters, you do have about 30 seconds. If they're going, what? And they can't tell what they need to know, they'll move on. And that's particularly when you're applying for the jobs with lots of people. If you're applying more for small or medium-sized businesses, they might take a bit longer. Okay, so it does depend, but in your big firms, you've got not long really. Um, so our CV builder, if you click on that link there in the tools, it will take you to this page, and you can see across the top it lists all the different things we were just mentioning. So your details will be your contact details, profile, education, work, that's work experience, skills, interest, and it continues. So they talk more about it on there. And this, remember, is accessible through the university website. You can work through each section, so this can really help you. What I'd advise you do is um, build your CV. You can check it on here as well. You can run it and it'll give you lots of different pointers. So if it's notices you're using similar words or you're not saying not saying certain skills that are needed, it'll give you advice. Now, you can take that advice on board, edit it, then you can go and see a careers advisor with the job description, say, this is what I'm putting forward. There isn't a perfect, hard, fast rule. You've got to use your judgment and experience. So you need to end up knowing the industry, knowing what they're looking for. So, how do we tailor it? Because we want that CV to be tailored for the job. But actually, how can we do that? And the obvious, well, I'll come back to this in a moment. The obvious way we would tailor it is looking at the job description. So it's the job description and the person spec that will help you tailor it. Okay, so let me just go forward. There is something here. So here, how do I know what they want? It's in the job description. So let's just have a look through this. So here's an example. It's just taken from an advert. Okay, so they're just saying about themselves. They're some sort of consultancy. Don't know. Could be management consultancy, marketing. It's irrelevant for this situation. But they're saying things about them here. Now, one thing I would say always look out for, especially if you're an international student, is wherever you see the words, we are looking for people, something who. So the word who, the words after that usually gives you a clue of the sorts of things they are looking for. So if we take a look at this one, so your personal skills, the skills that you can show, they are looking for someone who has entrepreneurial flair. So have you got any example how you might be able to show that? Someone with strong interpersonal skills. Again, do you have that? How can you show it? One thing we notice with a lot of students is they often feel they don't have the skills, and then they start telling our careers coaches, well, I was doing this, I was doing that, I'm working on this, and they don't always see the link between what they're doing and a transferable skill like interpersonal skills or problem solver or taking the initiative. And often at your stage, it's that making those connections there. So really, before you even start writing your CV, you want to have your job description out. You want to highlight, okay, what are the things they're looking for? You want that really clear in your mind. You want to then brainstorm, okay, what are the different things I've done? How can I relate it to this? Okay, there will probably be some gaps. Don't worry too much if there are gaps, but you might want to think, okay, how am I going to fill those gaps in the next few months so that the next time I'm applying, I can also add things on? One thing I've noticed over the years as well is some or not just students, people generally, um, some people think if they haven't got every single thing, then there's no point ever applying. But actually, just because you haven't always got everything, they might be looking for someone else that they've just not really put on that job description. So for me personally, I think it's like any sort of sales. The more you go out, the more you put yourself out there, the more that you're going to get coming back. Um, so that's how we find out what we're needing. And it's your conversations with your careers coach will really help you with this. Okay. But do go to them having already looked through the job description, already thought what you think they're looking for, highlighting it so you can have a richer conversation with your careers coach. Okay. Now, if we just go back a bit. So if you remember at the start, with all those pretty pictures of CVs of different types, people used to get very bothered about, oh, it should look really flashy. And yes, you want to grab the recruiter's attention. But remember, if that ATS system is being used, then it could be problematic because it might not get through that system. Um, If you're going for a smaller firm, that you could do it that way. But actually, coming back to what's effective, the main thing that CVs are rejected for over and over again, yes, if it's not presented well, if there's typos or the layout's really bad and it's hard to read, yes, they won't bother because they've got other options to look at. But what really matters every time is the content. So it's either you've got lovely stuff, you've talked all about things you've done in your life, but none of it's relevant to the role. You A lot of people when they're writing CVs, if they haven't been trained and they don't know how to do it, they tend to write it from their perspective of I've done all this great stuff, but you've got to put the hat on of the recruiter and think, okay, I'm the recruiter. What do I want to see out of all this great stuff you've done in your life? What's relevant to the role? So the content is the key thing with this. If you get the content right, everything else will fall into place. Okay, so spend longer on the content than on the design would be my advice. One thing with the content, don't lie. It sounds silly, but especially with AI, especially with chat GPT and those sorts of things, it will write wonderful words, but often it's not true. And if it's not something you've done, it will be picked up at one stage. To give you an example, it was quite a number of years ago now. I had a student run in to see me who was terribly excited and terribly scared at the same time because he had an interview with a big company in about 2 days' time. And he said, Jenny, I need your help. I need your help. I was like, okay, well, what's the problem? And he said, well, I've got the interview. It's great. It's wonderful. But the interview is going to be in French. And I was like, oh, okay. So did you say that you can speak French? And he said, yes. I said, I'm fluent in French. I was like, okay. So you're worried about your French. So what level is your French? And that's when he said, well, actually, I only studied it until I was 15. So he basically kind of over exaggerated the truth to such a degree. Now, this company, had he done his research, they always do their interviews in French. So he should have probably done his research. But also, he panicked. He didn't get the job because he couldn't do the interview. So there's we struggle, I think, sometimes to find the balance, people, between selling yourself and slightly putting a really positive spin on things versus actually going too far, and then that's no longer the truth. So your content matters. It can be hard, especially when you're starting out in an industry. That's why you need to try and get experience, and that's why working with your careers advisors to gain transferable skills will really help you in the long run. Okay, so remember, this is something you'll be doing a lot over time. So you're basically making a sales pitch on your CV, a sales pitch in order to get an interview or to get to the assessment center. And you want to put, when you're putting around your work experience, sometimes people put the word we. So we achieved this, we did that. It's best you always put I on a CV because they're bothered about what you did personally. You want recent experiences, but you can take all parts of your life. So hobbies, societies, other things. I would typically put it as work experience and then other experience, and that other experience are the hobbies, societies, clubs, voluntary, whatever other things. Work shadowing. You might have asked to go and work shadow someone. And your language really matters. Now, online, you'll find that same area that I showed earlier. You'll find they provide words like action verbs and action words that are much more useful for CVs. So you can put set up, but they tend to prefer the word founded, launched. So they're just words that have a bit more impact, really. So there's whole lists of them online, and again, your careers coaches can help you with that. So where do you get all that evidence from? So we've talked about experience. Some of you might have worked part-time, some of you might not. And if you haven't, you need to try to be doing other things to try and show you're getting little bits of experience to gain some sort of skills that are relevant for these jobs, okay? You might get in anyway. We're currently in a job market in some areas where actually there's more jobs than actual people applying. So you might get lucky and you might get in without it, but it's always good to be building a bank of experience. It might be quite short experiences. It doesn't have to be you're always doing it part time all the time. It could just be like you've done 20 hours of helping out with something, but okay, what's the relevance? So if you're worried about lacking direct experience, my advice would be to focus on what we call transferable skills. How can you demonstrate you have transferable skills? And it helps sometimes just chatting to family and friends, people you kind of trust, as well as your careers advisor, saying, "Okay, I need to demonstrate this, but how can I demonstrate it? What have I done?" Sometimes those who know you have heard over your life all the things you've done. Sometimes they're the best place to come back to you to say, "Well, yeah, of course you've done that. You've done speaking. Okay, it says public speaking, but remember when you had to stand up and talk about da 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 da? That would count." And some people around you sometimes remember things better than you do. Um, so work shadowing is definitely something I'd recommend if you can get into that as well. And there's lots of other ways here. It's kind of outside the scope to go into the details. So this was that job description and how you find the skills. And here are examples of what we would call transferable skills. Um, so your attention to detail accuracy, perhaps, I don't know, in one of your projects as a team, were the one who was carefully going through things, proofreading. um Languages, whatever languages you have, are always transferable. So all these sorts of things, it's just trying to find how can you demonstrate you have that from something else that wasn't specifically the exact same work experience that they're asking for. So what I would recommend you do, we're actually finishing really early on this one, so we've got lots of time for conversations, chats, discussions. So I would recommend for your next actions that you have a go building your CV based on what we've written here today. You can use that CV builder online. Personally, I'd advise against using ChatGPT, but for the reasons I mentioned earlier. But first, start off building your CV. You can then upload it onto our university careers website to get that feedback. So that's the initial feedback. They're basing that on lots of terms that they see on job descriptions. Okay, it's really good that we've all had a go putting that on. It's really great. Now, once you've done that, once you've made all those improvements, that's the stage when you can book an appointment with a careers coach. You can go to them earlier, but you'll get the most out of the appointments when you've got something to go with, something to discuss. And remember, you want to be doing all this with a job description. If you don't have a perfect job description, you're not sure what you want to do yet, just pick one that's roughly in the area of roughly what you want to do, and have a go that way. Okay.